I stood up to toast my daughter's success and ended my marriage instead. But I never saw the real ambush coming, until it was too late. I thought I was being bold, thought I was reclaiming my life. What I didn't know was that I was walking straight into a trap, one so flawlessly executed, so surgically precise that by the time I realized I'd been played, it was already over. It started at a polished oak table in an upscale Augusta restaurant. Amelia, my daughter, sat between Bianca and me, glowing in her cap and gown. The lighting was soft, the champagne chilled. Our friends, our community had gathered to celebrate Amelia's graduation. I had planned this dinner for weeks. It was supposed to be the perfect send-off to the next chapter of her life and mine. And yet, as I stood glass raised, I felt the weight of the moment and a strange thrill. This was my chance to break free, to finally shed the pretense. I didn't want to grow old with Bianca. I hadn't for years. Cassandra was waiting, young, passionate, full of the energy that had drained from my marriage a decade ago. So I said it. I've decided to start a new life. Without you. Silence. The kind that drains color from the room. 50 faces froze mid-chew. My daughter's eyes widened, her smile. Frozen. Bianca, ever composed, simply tilted her head. No tears. No slap. Just a smile. And then she said it so calmly it cut deeper than any shout. Congratulations on your honesty. That was it. She turned to Amelia and kissed her cheek, telling her she was proud. Then stood, addressed the guests, and walked out, graceful, dignified, unreadable. That wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to fall apart. Beg me not to do this. Cause a scene. Instead, she handed me an envelope, told me to read it later, and left me sitting there like a fool. I felt eyes on me. Some pitied me, others looked disgusted, and a few smiled like they knew something I didn't. I waited barely 30 seconds before I followed her outside, anger rising in my throat. Bianca, what the hell is this? What have you done? She didn't stop walking, just lifted a hand in a half-wave and disappeared around the corner. I tore the envelope open right there on the sidewalk. Divorce papers, meticulously assembled, complete with dates, financial statements, text logs, and a goddamn prenup I had signed nearly 30 years ago. I skimmed the documents, heat rising to my face. Fidelity clause, asset forfeiture, financial misconduct. My heart sank. She knew. She knew everything, and she'd been planning this. Not for days, not weeks. Months, maybe longer. I sat in my car, stunned. Cassandra would be waiting at her apartment. I was supposed to meet her that evening, champagne in hand, and begin our new chapter. But this wasn't a new beginning anymore. It was the start of a free fall. Back at home, our home, there was no sign of Bianca, just the echo of my own footsteps and the sinking realization that this house, this life, might not be mine for much longer. Upstairs, I found my suitcases neatly packed in the back of the closet, just as I'd left them. I'd planned to slip out the next day. She had beat me to it, outplayed me on my own stage. My phone buzzed. Diana, my sister. Then Amelia. Then a stream of messages from friends, some asking if the divorce rumors were true, others saying, "You okay, man?" None of them would ever look at me the same way again. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay on the couch in the living room, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, head spinning. Cassandra sent me a dozen texts asking what happened. I didn't respond. What could I say? That I had underestimated my wife? That I thought I was the one ending things when in fact I was just an opening act in her meticulously staged finale? And the worst part was I couldn't even blame her. Bianca had always been the planner, the caretaker, the one who held the threads of our life together. I'd gotten comfortable, entitled. I thought I could replace her and walk away clean, but I forgot that the one person who knew me best was also the one most capable of destroying me. I didn't go back to Cassandra that night. I drove aimlessly at first down quiet Augusta streets, where oak trees arched like cathedrals, and the yellow glow of porch lights flickered like the judgmental gaze of an old town that knew exactly what I'd done. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, breath-shallow thoughts racing in a loop I couldn't seem to exit. I kept seeing Bianca's face, not tearful or broken like I imagined it would be, but calm, almost pitiful. Like a teacher watching a student fail a test she knew he'd ignored studying for. There was no screaming, no slammed doors, just an envelope. And now that envelope weighed more than everything I owned. I parked outside a Walgreens around midnight, stared blankly at the glowing red letters, and tried to slow my breathing. There's a specific kind of dread that sinks into you when you realize you've lost something, not in the moment it slips away, but in the quiet afterward when you start to understand what it truly meant. And for the first time in years, I began to see what Bianca had really been. I used to think she was the anchor keeping me from sailing into bigger things. Truth was, she had been the rudder, the one silently steering through every storm I created. Every financial misstep, every restless pivot in career, every mood swing I dressed up as personal growth. She bore it, held the line. I chased meaning. She paid bills. When I finally made it home just after 1 a.m., the house felt foreign, a beautiful cage that no longer belonged to me. I sat on the edge of our bed, her bed now, and opened the envelope again, slower this time. The details were excruciating. Bank transfers, dates, screenshots, line items tagged and labeled. I had no idea she'd even noticed the withdrawals, let alone traced them to the second account. My second account. The one I thought I'd hidden beneath enough innocuous labeling to avoid suspicion. Consulting income asset, flow operational reserves. The kind of jargon I figured would bore her into ignoring it. But she hadn't ignored a damn thing. Worse, she had court filings time-stamped before the graduation dinner. She'd filed for divorce the morning of Amelia's ceremony. That fact alone should have floored me. But the prenup, that was the knockout. It had been my idea all those years ago, back when I had a startup dream and a check from my father that made me feel like a king. I didn't want her to touch what I might build, and she, more secure, more loving, more trusting, had agreed without a fuss. Even added the fidelity clause herself, joking that it was her one condition since she had no plans to ever leave me and no patience for betrayal. I had laughed at the time. She had smiled like it meant nothing. Now it meant everything. The clause had teeth. Real ones. It dictated that in the event of infidelity, proven or admitted, she retained the marital home, 70% of joint assets, and full rights to any property obtained during the marriage, unless otherwise designated. I remembered brushing it off as ceremonial back then. A romantic flourish. We were in love. Nothing would ever come to that. But it had. And she hadn't just found out about Cassandra. She had documented everything, from dinners to jewelry receipts, from phone records to real estate inquiries. My hands trembled as I reread the legal summary. This wasn't a divorce filing, it was a tactical strike. And somehow, it was only beginning. The next morning, sunlight streamed in through the living room windows, too bright and too clean for the pit I was sinking into. I hadn't slept. Not really. I drifted in and out of a dark, anxious haze, never quite dreaming, never fully awake. I made coffee, I didn't drink, and stared blankly at the kitchen counter where just 2 days ago, Cassandra and I had talked about beach properties in Hilton Head. She'd flipped through listings on her tablet voice, lilting with excitement about ocean views and wraparound porches. We'd fantasized about porch swings and fresh starts, and I'd believed in all of it. Now all I could think about was how little I'd understood the life I already had. The first real blow came at 9:17 a.m. when my Chase account flagged an access denial. My login credentials still worked, but the account was frozen. I tried to call the bank only to be met with a polite voice informing me that a court-ordered injunction had been placed on all joint marital assets pending legal review. I asked to speak to someone, anyone but the case manager, only reiterated that further inquiries needed to go through my legal counsel. I didn't have legal counsel. Yet. At 10:31, Cassandra called. I didn't pick up. I couldn't. What would I say? That I had underestimated my wife? That my exit plan had just detonated under my feet? She called again at 11:04, then texted, then again at noon. At 12:03, I finally answered. Her voice was breathless, panicked. She had gone to the leasing office for the apartment I promised we'd move into, only to be told the application had been terminated due to unverified income. Apparently, Bianca had intercepted the leasing agent's verification call to our home phone and shut it down. I didn't say much, just listened, nodded, took the blows one after another. I hung up without a clear goodbye, then sat alone in the kitchen, head in my hands, heart beating like a drum in a funeral procession. By 2 p.m. I started to notice the calls. Not from Cassandra, from others, mutual friends, business contacts, even Diana, my own sister. They were brief, awkward conversations. Some didn't even get that far. A few texts asking if it was true. One friend asked if I needed a place to crash. That stung, because I still lived in my own home, but somehow they already knew I wouldn't for long. I tried to stay calm. I tried to collect myself, but the wave of shame building behind my ribs was relentless. I wasn't just losing my marriage, I was losing my standing, my narrative. Bianca had always let me play the role of the ambitious visionary, the guy with ideas, the one who took risks for the future of the family. And I had believed my own performance. But now that story was gone, replaced by something cold and clinical and true. She had proof and a plan, and I idiotically had neither. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine and finally sat down with my laptop. Not to work, not to read the news, but to dig into the digital evidence she'd provided. It was all there, hyperlinked and time-stamped, like an audit report from hell. Restaurant receipts, my card, my signature. Jewelry purchases matched to photo evidence on Cassandra's Instagram. A necklace, a bracelet, a trip to Asheville in the fall. Every romantic flourish now listed like criminal charges in a spreadsheet. And the texts. Jesus, the texts. She had printed out messages between me and Cassandra. Dozens of them, maybe more. All real, all damning, all stupid. How had she gotten access to those? Then I remembered my phone. I had left it unattended on the kitchen counter more than once. And my password, Bianca had known it for years. I tried to laugh, but it came out as a wheeze. The real gut punch was realizing she didn't confront me because she didn't need to. She didn't want an apology. She wanted precision, silence, strategy. She had spent months watching me lie to her face, pretending, planning, smiling across the dinner table while quietly preparing to dismantle my entire world. And I never saw it coming. There was something terrifying about that level of stillness, something surgical, clinical, a depth of cold resolve I had never credited her with, and maybe that was my biggest mistake, underestimating her. I had seen her as nurturing, not calculating, gentle, not strategic, but she had outmaneuvered me in ways I didn't think she was capable of. And the part that rattled me most, she hadn't raised her voice once, no fury, no rage. Just a slow, steady legal dissection of everything I had built. She didn't need to scream. The facts did the screaming for her. By the time the sun set, I had barely moved. The bottle was half empty. My laptop buzzed with a new email, my business partner forwarding a message from one of our key clients. Apparently, rumors were spreading. There were concerns about my focus, my judgment. No one had said the word affair, but it didn't matter. The air was poisoned, and the real rot hadn't even begun. I went to bed with a migraine pounding behind my temples and 1,000 versions of regret swarming through my head like locusts. In the dark, I thought about Amelia, how she had looked at me when I made the announcement. That look, like I had just gutted her on the happiest day of her life. I could stomach losing the house, the money, even Cassandra. But that look, that would stay with me forever. And I knew deep down that Bianca had seen that look too. And that was why she didn't interrupt me. Why she let me speak first, let me dig my grave in front of everyone we knew. She wanted Amelia to see it for herself, to see me not the father I'd been, but the man I'd become. It wasn't just revenge. It was exposure. And as I drifted into a fitful sleep, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit. I wasn't the one orchestrating anything anymore. I was the mark. And the game had just begun. I always assumed I was the smartest person in the room. It wasn't arrogance at first, at least I didn't think so. Just a quiet confidence I built over years of smooth-talking investors, charming my way through meetings and talking circles around people who had only half read the reports I'd spent nights skimming. I could spin a failure into a strategic pivot and make a bloated idea sound like visionary risk. It worked. It always worked. Until it didn't. And the first time I felt the walls tighten around me, really felt it was the morning after I tried calling my lawyer. Not my lawyer, exactly just the guy I'd used once 3 years ago when a client tried to back out of a partnership agreement. I figured I'd call him again. Keep it clean. Get a separation going before Bianca had time to act further. But when I explained the situation, there was a long pause on the line, a quiet breath, and then a polite decline. He was already retained. By Bianca, it hit me like ice water. Not just because she'd already lawyered up that part I expected, but because she had anticipated me calling this exact person, months in advance. She had moved early, laid claim to the very counsel I might have thought of, maybe even guessed from our shared history. She had blocked the route before I even stepped onto the path. That moment was my first true taste of powerlessness. And from there, it only got worse. I found another lawyer, eventually a young associate from a downtown corporate firm who specialized in asset shielding and white-collar messes. He was smart, sure, but not seasoned, and certainly not prepared for a domestic case wrapped in years of financial entanglement and emotional betrayal. Still, I gave him everything I had, laid it all out, sort of. I told him Bianca and I were divorcing, that she had filed first, that she had documentation, though I downplayed how much. I didn't tell him about the prenup. Not yet. I told myself I was buying time, that maybe, just maybe, we could wriggle through the cracks in her case, that she had overplayed her hand. But the longer I waited, the worse it got. Because Bianca wasn't building her case anymore. It was already built. The paperwork was precise. Dates, transfers, photos, even subtle emotional manipulation things I'd texted Cassandra that now read like confessions of emotional cruelty. Bianca will never see this coming, I'd written once. She's too stuck in routine to even notice. The irony now hung around my neck like a noose. And the worst part was I couldn't argue with any of it, not honestly. So I began to imagine alternate truths, muted defenses. What if I framed it all as a midlife crisis? What if I could make the court see me as a man overwhelmed by stagnation, yearning for vitality, not malicious, but merely lost? But then I found her folders, tucked neatly into a shared Dropbox we hadn't used in years. Labeled innocuously, Family Budget 2023. I hadn't even remembered it existed. Curiosity, or maybe guilt, pushed me to open it. And what I found there froze me solid. It wasn't a budget. It was a digital graveyard for my credibility. Spreadsheets, PDFs, screenshots, voice memos, notations of conversations, email chains with timestamps, not just Cassandra-related material, but the whole history, every instance where I had dipped into savings without discussion, every deferred vacation, every dismissed plan Bianca had made for herself that I had steamrolled. Every promise I forgot I'd broken. She had logged them all. She hadn't just built a legal case. She'd built a character case. Not just the what, but the why. A motive map, a personality profile, a timeline of erosion. She had mapped my decline in choices, moment by moment. And when I finally reached the folder labeled For Attorney, my stomach turned. There it was, the prenup. Annotated, highlighted, cross-referenced with financial records side by side, with calendar entries, proof of fidelity violations matched to credit card charges, and travel logs. Every line of that document had been dissected and prepared like evidence at a war tribunal. She knew the law. She knew our history. And she knew the ways I would try to lie, even to myself. I closed the file and sat back in my chair, staring at nothing. My hands trembled. It wasn't just that she had found a way to win. It was that she had done it with so little noise. No threats, no dramatic ultimatums, just quiet, methodical dismantling. A kind of rage wrapped in velvet. That evening, I sat in the dark with the television on mute. Cassandra texted again. I didn't answer. I didn't know what I would even say anymore. She'd started to unravel too, sending messages full of, "We need to talk," and what's happening with the apartment. I could feel her panic bleeding through every syllable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But all I could do was sit in the cage I'd built for myself, realizing I was no longer the one calling the shots. Bianca had flipped the power dynamic, turned my precision against me, and done it all without ever stepping outside the law. For weeks, maybe longer, I had been living in a house wired for my own undoing. And she had let me. She had watched me kiss our daughter goodnight and then text Cassandra 10 minutes later. Watched me go on about tightening the budget while hiding receipts from beachfront restaurants. Let me walk in and out, smug and stupid, never letting on that she was quietly stitching together the story of my own downfall. And now that I knew, I couldn't unsee it. I started to notice things around the house. Notes in her handwriting, a legal pad by her side of the bed with half-erased calculations. Her laptop never left out anymore. Always tucked away, always locked. She had been playing chess while I was busy reshuffling the same hand of cards. The days that followed were a slow collapse. My attorney, now fully looped in, sat me down and went through the prenup line by line. I watched his eyes widen as he reached the infidelity clause. He looked at me like I was an idiot. Maybe I was. He asked me bluntly if I had any counters, any leverage, anything she might want that could soften the blow. I had nothing, because Bianca didn't want leverage. She wanted clean severance, no noise, no emotion, just silence and closure. That terrified me more than anything, because if she had screamed at me, if she had broken down or begged or thrown something, I could have made sense of it, labeled it, categorized it, filed it under emotional fallout or female response. But she hadn't. She had remained resolute. I had humiliated her in front of our daughter, our friends, and still, she hadn't retaliated in kind. Instead, she buried me in facts. And there's no defense against facts. I began to dream about her. Not the woman I had married, but the woman I realized she had become. Quiet eyes, calm hands, a stillness like deep water. In my dreams, she didn't speak. She just watched. And that was somehow worse than any words. My days became bureaucratic triage. Phone calls to the bank, meetings with my lawyer, attempts to pull paperwork I hadn't touched in years, accounts frozen, assets reviewed. I spent whole afternoons tracing paper trails that she had already mapped weeks ago. I was always 2 steps behind, always. At night, I would sit in my car outside the apartment complex where Cassandra and I were supposed to move. I never went in. I'd just stare up at the dark windows and feel the ache of everything I had burned. She had started pulling away, not overtly but subtly. The way her texts lost their warmth. The way she stopped talking about our life. The way her tone shifted from excited to apprehensive. She could smell the ruin on me now. And like most people who crave fresh starts, she had no stomach for collateral damage. Bianca, on the other hand, was rebuilding. I'd heard whispers that she was meeting with advisors, that she had rented a small office downtown, that she was laying groundwork for a financial consultancy, something she had once dreamed of in our early years, an idea I had dismissed as impractical. Now it was her escape hatch, her rebirth, and I was the ghost in her past. There's a moment right before the full weight of consequence lands where your body and mind part ways, where you feel yourself floating just above the mess, watching it spiral, wishing desperately you could step in and edit the last few chapters. But life isn't a manuscript. It's a ledger. And mine was finally being audited. I started preparing for the hearing in a daze, gathering what little I could. My lawyer tried to shield me, to play for time, to argue technicalities. But even he knew we were stalling. Bianca had won the moment I raised that champagne glass. Maybe even earlier. The prenup was enforceable. The accounts were locked. The paper trail was undeniable. She had built a case not just for court, but for character assassination. And she hadn't needed to exaggerate a single thing. She just let the truth speak louder than I ever did. And as I sat in my empty study one night, our daughter's graduation photo still on the shelf, her bright eyes shining with the kind of pride that would never return, I felt the full weight of it. Not just the failure, but the blindness. I had mistaken quiet for weakness, and now in the wreckage I understood the truth. Bianca hadn't changed. She had revealed, and I was only just beginning to see. There are certain silences a man never forgets. The silence inside a house that's no longer his, though the keys still fit, though the furniture remains, though every photo still hangs with stubborn familiarity. It's the sound of something gone hollow, like the breathless pause between thunder and the downpour. That's what I stepped into the moment I opened the door to our home. No, her home now. I stood just inside the threshold, my hand still on the doorknob as if letting go of it would unmoor me. The same hardwood I'd crossed 1,000 times beneath muddy boots and polished shoes now felt foreign, like stepping onto the stage of a play where I no longer belonged in the cast. The scent hit me first. Clean linen, faint lavender, the kind of sterile calm you only notice when you're the only storm left in the room. She hadn't changed much, everything was still in place. The rug we picked out in Asheville. The antique mirror that warped your reflection if you stood just off-center. Even the framed picture of Amelia's first day of school, frozen in time. But the air had shifted. And I knew it the same way you know when someone's been crying in a room alone, the way the walls hold it, the way the light bends differently when something sacred's been broken. Bianca wasn't in the living room, but her presence was everywhere. She had always filled this house in ways I never understood until she stopped trying. I walked slowly past the sideboard, past the hallway that led to Amelia's old bedroom, past the coat rack that still held my spring jacket, like it hadn't noticed I'd disappeared. My footsteps sounded too loud against the quiet. Every creak underfoot felt like a trespass. And then I saw her. She was seated in the far corner of the living room laptop, balanced on her knees, a stack of papers beside her, highlighter in hand. No tension, no raised eyebrows, no dramatic shift in posture. She didn't even look up immediately. Just underlined. Something clicked, once then closed the screen softly and placed it on the side table. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked up at me. Finally, eyes clear, shoulders relaxed as if she'd been expecting me the whole time. There was no greeting, just that damn silence again. It didn't scream, it judged. I moved to sit across from her, but stopped myself. The space between us was not just physical, it was a chasm. I didn't know how to cross it anymore. So I stood there like a boy caught sneaking into the principal's office. She reached for a folder from the side table and slid it forward on the ottoman between us. Neat, deliberate, not even a flourish of aggression. Just execution. Inside was everything I already knew and more. Every lie I'd told had been annotated. Every omission given context. Even my absences those evenings I blamed on networking or long drives, to think she had mapped them against credit card statements and cell tower pings. She hadn't asked me to explain myself. She had already understood me, and in understanding she had dismantled me. There's a unique kind of despair in realizing your own life has been fact-checked. I remember staring down at the folder and trying to summon some vestige of control. Some spark of the man who once commanded boardrooms and sealed million-dollar deals with a handshake. But all I could feel was this growing nausea, like I'd swallowed my own arrogance, and now it was dissolving from the inside out. She spoke only when necessary, calm, measured, efficient. She laid out the terms of temporary asset freezes, custody of the house, timelines for hearings. Not once did her voice crack. Not once did her fingers fidget. It was like speaking to a CEO mid-hostile takeover. And I was the acquisition being stripped for parts. She didn't accuse. She didn't shout. That's what broke me. I'd prepared for a war, but she'd brought a scalpel. When I finally managed to respond, I don't even remember what I said. Something half-hearted, defensive, probably self-pitying. But it didn't matter. She didn't engage. She had moved beyond the need to justify herself, and somehow that hurt more than rage ever could. It dawned on me then that I wasn't the villain in her story anymore. I wasn't even a threat. I was irrelevant. She gathered the papers, calmly placed them back in the folder, and stood. No dramatic exit, just a simple gesture that said, "We're done here." But I wasn't. I followed her to the kitchen, tried to find footing in the past, grasping at fragments. A memory of dancing tipsy around that granite island, of midnight ice cream runs, of plans scribbled on napkins. But she moved through the space like none of it existed anymore. Like she'd already renovated her memory. And I was just drywall waiting to be torn out. The silence stretched so long it became unbearable. So I reached for the oldest trick in my book. I talked about Amelia. Not directly. Just enough. I mentioned the graduation, her future, how this could affect her. I watched for any flicker of weakness. Bianca paused just briefly, her hand resting on the refrigerator handle. Then she nodded once more to herself, then to me, and turned to face me fully. What I saw wasn't fury, it wasn't hurt. It was disappointment. Quiet-age disappointment, like the look a mother gives a son who's failed a test she knew he never studied for. And then she said something one line sharp and clean, and I felt it land deeper than I expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She walked past me into the hallway, then back toward the staircase. I followed her up my body, moving before my brain could catch up, still clinging to the illusion that this was my house, our life. But it wasn't. The bedroom door was open. Inside, everything was arranged as it had always been, but stripped of sentiment. His and hers towels now folded with perfect neutrality. The photo of our wedding that once hung above the dresser was gone, leaving behind a faint, sun-bleached outline on the wall. I crossed the room slowly toward the closet, unsure of what I was even doing. But when I pulled open the door, I stopped cold. My things were already packed, not thrown into boxes, not hastily discarded. No, folded, organized. Like she had taken care with even this final kindness. Suitcases lined neatly along the back wall, shoes paired, shirts buttoned, belts coiled like sleeping snakes. She had anticipated everything, right down to this moment, and that terrified me. Not because she had acted without emotion, but because she had acted in spite of it. The dignity of it was unbearable. It was only then that I began to panic in earnest. Not loud, not visible, but internal seismic. My heart crawled into my throat. I felt sweat prick under my collar. Because suddenly I realized she was going to be fine without me, truly fine. And that left me with nothing but the echo of my own choices. I made my way downstairs like a man descending from a verdict. Not a word was exchanged, not a breath wasted. When I reached the foyer, I paused, looked back. She wasn't following. Of course not. The door felt heavier than I remembered. Like it knew it was closing for good. Outside, the world hadn't changed. Cars still passed. Birds still chirped. But inside me, something had cracked wide open. I sat in the driveway for a long time, engine off, windows down, listening, thinking, drowning. Then my phone buzzed. It was Cassandra, again. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was dawning in real time, unbearable and slow. I'd never really chosen her. Not completely. She had just been the exit I didn't deserve. And now even that was collapsing. Inside that house, Bianca had executed a confrontation without raising her voice. She had exiled me from my own life without slamming a single door. That kind of strength, I'd never seen it before. But now that I had, I couldn't unsee it. And I couldn't forgive myself for not recognizing it when it still loved me. There's a point in every unraveling when you stop trying to fix the threads and just stare at the wreckage. Not because you've given up, at least not at first, but because you no longer understand how the tapestry was ever held together in the first place. That's where I was. Not angry, not fighting, just stunned and silent. It started with whispers like cracks in glass that hadn't shattered yet but spread quietly beneath the surface, the kind you feel before you see. I noticed it in the way old friends stopped returning calls, the way business associates hesitated just a half-beat longer before confirming meetings, the way my inbox began to fill with vague apologies and postponed plans. They didn't come for the spectacle, not directly. People like to pretend they're above it. But I could feel the shift, the recalibration. One by one, people who had once orbited my world began to lean toward Bianca instead, toward her gravity, because she hadn't just built a legal case, she'd built a narrative. One quiet enough to seem honest and detailed enough to be undeniable. She didn't scream. She didn't post. She just let the truth seep into the spaces between people, and the silence told them everything. It took less than a week for my professional life to feel the tremors. First, it was the quarterly pitch with an investment firm I'd been courting for 6 months. Cancelled. No explanation. Then a subtle suggestion from my junior partner that maybe we delay expansion talks. Then a long email from the board about image alignment and brand integrity. Phrases that hadn't meant much when I was the golden goose, but now rang with sharp edges. By Friday, I received a carefully worded message from a client I had landed 2 years prior, one of my biggest. They were restructuring, which really meant we've heard enough to back away politely. They didn't say divorce, didn't say infidelity, didn't need to. The stain was already there. It wasn't that people were angry. It was worse than that. They were embarrassed for me. Like I was a cautionary tale that had wandered out of the boardroom and into their dinners, a reminder of how fast credibility can rot when you stop watering the truth. And still I kept showing up, kept answering calls, kept pretending I could salvage the narrative. But I felt it, the shift from respect to pity. That quiet, unspoken conclusion in people's eyes. He had it all, and he threw it away. And I had, but not for the reasons they thought. Not for lust or love or even ambition. I'd thrown it away for escape from a life I was too proud to admit I no longer understood with a woman I thought I'd outgrown, but who it turns out had only outpaced me. Cassandra, for her part, was beginning to splinter under the weight of reality. She was still beautiful, still charming, still soft-spoken in the way that had once felt like oxygen after a long drought. But now, her tone changed. Her laughter, once effortless, grew brittle. She started asking questions about money, about next steps, about why everything was suddenly so complicated. At first I placated her, told her it was temporary, a bump in the road. But she saw through it. She had always been perceptive in a way I mistook for sweetness. Now it felt like surveillance. She moved into the apartment anyway, the one I thought I'd secured, though Bianca had already sabotaged the lease weeks prior. When the leasing office called, she had simply answered the phone and spoken like she always did, calm, polite, surgical. She asked if the name on the application had included her, even though she knew the answer. When they said yes, she raised the concern of joint liability without confirmed financial standing. A red flag. The application died quietly, like everything else I touched. Cassandra wasn't thrilled, but she adjusted for a time, until the cracks started to show. Until she realized I wasn't the man I'd promised I would be in all those whispered conversations and hotel stays. The man with a plan. The man who had a future, not one hemorrhaging the past. And she, like everyone else, began to retreat. It didn't happen all at once. It started with missed dinners, then clipped conversations, then a coldness in bed that didn't have to be explained. The day I found her crying in the bathroom, phone clutched in her hand, I didn't ask who she'd been talking to. I didn't need to. She left 3 days later. No note, no grand speech, just a cleaned-out closet and a hollow quiet that felt strangely familiar. Bianca hadn't spoken to me since the confrontation at home. She hadn't needed to. The silence between us now had more weight than any argument ever could. She had moved out of my orbit, completely gravitated toward a new center, and word on the street was that she was thriving. She'd rented a bright little office in a refurbished downtown building, exposed brick-arched windows, the kind of space that whispered both elegance and resolve. She was consulting now, helping other women navigate their financial transitions. Divorce, widowhood, career restarts. She had built an enterprise out of the very ruin I left her in, and the city noticed. They always notice a woman who doesn't burn down her life, but repurposes it. The same people who once smiled at me across gala tables were now quietly investing in her future, recommending her services, applauding her poise. They never said it out loud, but I saw it in their eyes whenever I crossed paths with them. She made something beautiful out of your wreckage, and I hated how true it was. I began to drink more, not like a bender, not all at once, just quietly. Late nights, cheap whiskey, the kind that goes down easy when you don't want to feel the edges anymore. It dulled the noise, but never the ache. Amelia stopped answering my texts after the third week. She had tried, bless her, in the beginning, reached out, checked in. But I saw the hesitation behind her words, the cautious distance. And when she finally stopped replying altogether, I didn't blame her. She had seen it all at her own graduation, no less. Watched her father publicly detonate a family legacy and then stand in the rubble trying to look noble. I had become a study in cowardice. She didn't need that in her life. I watched her Instagram silently. A proud smile here, a new apartment tour there. She had landed a job in Charleston, bright office creative work, young co-workers with tattoos and bright hair and hopeful energy. A world that didn't include me, and probably never would again. And that, more than the legal loss, more than the financial collapse, was what finally broke me. I had always assumed I'd have time to explain, to reconnect, to fix it, but time doesn't wait for regret. It just leaves you behind. The final blow came during the emergency hearing. A rainy Tuesday morning courtroom, gray and humming with fluorescent light. Bianca arrived with her attorney Philip, something clean-cut, precise, carrying a neat leather folio, and the calm of someone who already knew the outcome. I arrived alone. My attorney had bailed 3 days prior. Some conflict of interest with a mutual client. I didn't bother replacing him. At that point, I had nothing left to argue. The judge was an older woman, stern but fair. She reviewed the prenup with surgical precision, read sections aloud, asked questions, confirmed timestamps, cross-examined exhibits. Everything Bianca had built, every clause, every violation was laid bare in neutral legal terms. And then, with the ease of flicking off a light switch, she ruled in her favor. Assets divided, house awarded, accounts frozen pending discovery. My world officially disassembled. I walked out of the courtroom alone. No confrontation, no one chasing me. Just the sound of Bianca's heels fading down the marble hallway. There was no scene, no closure, just silence. I sat on the courthouse steps for almost an hour. No umbrella, just drizzle, just thoughts, just the weight of what a man becomes when he finally sees himself clearly. Not a hero, not even a villain, just small. And by the time I stood up, one thing was clear. This wasn't the bottom. This was just what I deserved. There's something eerie about the finality of a courtroom, the way the air inside never moves, the way fluorescent lights cast everything in a pale, neutral glow that makes even the most personal battles feel institutional. The wood is polished, the chairs are rigid, and the truth, no matter how brutal, gets filtered through decorum. But nothing. Not the stiff backs of those pew-like benches, not the rhythm of lawyers shuffling paper, not even the judge's monotone voice prepared me for the last time I saw Bianca Caldwell across a courtroom floor. It was the end of everything. Not just our marriage or our house or our accounts. The end of the narrative. I'd always told myself that I was the one in control, that I was the center of gravity in every room, that people revolved around me. That illusion shattered quietly. Precisely, like everything else she'd orchestrated. The courtroom was small, more intimate than I imagined. No high drama, no theatrics, just a muted bureaucracy where life was dismantled in bullet points. I arrived 15 minutes early, habit maybe, or anxiety. I didn't know what to wear, so I put on the last suit I had that still fit well. Charcoal gray, wrinkled from the dry cleaner I hadn't paid yet. The tie I grabbed was from our 10th anniversary dinner. I didn't realize that until I saw it in the mirror, and by then it felt too symbolic to remove. Bianca came in just before the hour. Calm, clean lines. A navy dress that looked like it had been ironed by silence itself. She carried nothing but a single folder. No legal entourage this time. Just her. She didn't look at me. Didn't acknowledge me. But she didn't avoid me either. She simply existed beyond me. That was the most devastating part. She no longer reacted to my presence, as if I'd been erased from the part of her brain that once stored tension. The judge entered. An older man, this time sharp, unsentimental gray hair neatly combed back. His voice was dry sandpaper, no nonsense. He reviewed the motion for final division of assets, read through the prenuptial agreement, again confirmed the affidavits of both parties. There was no dispute left, no fireworks to be launched, just closure, as cold and clean as a guillotine blade. I sat there, not listening so much as enduring. My thoughts floated above the room, detached and dull. Every few seconds I'd glance at Bianca, trying to find any sign, any flicker of the woman who had once said I do, with trembling fingers and soft eyes. But she didn't flicker. She didn't fold. She didn't even blink out of rhythm. She had rehearsed this, lived it already in her mind, grieved it, buried it. I was the only one still trying to claw through the soil. And then the numbers came, line by line, item by item. Our accounts were divided, her share 70%, mine the remainder plus penalties for concealed transfers. Our properties. She retained the house and the Savannah retreat. I kept nothing. The apartment I tried to lease for Cassandra, disqualified from the start. The investment account, frozen and partially liquidated to cover legal fees. Our business entanglements sorted, severed. Every dotted line untangled with a clinical precision I didn't think possible. The judge read through the final clause, the enforcement of the fidelity provision, still valid under the original prenuptial agreement, upheld under state law. The clause that undid me. I felt the room shift slightly, like gravity tilted, like my chair no longer rested on steady floorboard. A dull roar grew in my ears, not noise exactly, but presence. The presence of consequences, arriving in slow, devastating waves. It wasn't until the judge asked if I had any final statement that I realized the room had gone quiet again. My lawyer nudged me. But what was there to say? What could I say? That I was sorry, that I was broken, that I didn't know who I was anymore, or worse, that I did and hated what I saw. I cleared my throat. Stared down at the table. Tried to piece together something dignified, but everything that came to mind felt like a closing statement for a man already buried. So I said nothing. The judge marked the final page, signed and closed the folder. And that was it. 28 years. Condensed into a signature. The sound of that pen scratching the final line that will haunt me more than any door slamming ever did. Bianca stood before I did. Gathered her things, though there were few, and walked to the door with measured grace. Not fast, not slow. Just certain. Like a woman who had crossed a finish line with no one left to beat. I followed 10 paces behind. Not to catch her. Just to escape the room that no longer contained a version of myself I could tolerate. Outside, the sky was overcast, the sidewalk slick with morning mist. I watched her step out into the gray light and pull her coat around her shoulders like armor. She didn't look back. And I didn't call her name. Not because I didn't want to, but because she wouldn't have stopped. She owed me nothing now. And somehow that was more crushing than hatred. Hatred still ties you to someone. Indifference. That's when you're gone. She crossed the street with the light disappeared into a line of taxis and umbrellas and indifferent traffic. I stood there, hands stuffed into my coat pockets, wondering how I'd become the ghost in my own ending. I went home, or what now passed for home, a dim one-bedroom in a bland complex on the south end of town. Cheap carpets, thin walls, a neighbor who cooked bacon every morning at 4:30 a.m. The kind of place built for transition, not living. It smelled like defeat. Or maybe I did. The final bank notifications came in that night. Confirmation of transfers, closures, asset release. Each ping on my phone was another nail in the coffin of a life I used to own. And then came the final one. A balance update. Not just what I was left with, but what I owed. The legal fees, the frozen funds, the deferred taxes I hadn't accounted for. The cleanup. It was less than nothing. I wasn't just broke. I was in debt to the very woman I had once promised to protect. And she didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. She had weaponized the truth and let it walk itself into court. And that, I think, is the most dangerous kind of revenge. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that doesn't gloat. The kind that arrives with receipts and a final line reading all rights reserved. I sat in the dark for hours, not drinking, not pacing, just sitting, trying to make sense of who I had become. I had started this journey thinking I was liberating myself. But the only person who'd found freedom was Bianca. And she hadn't chased it. She had earned it. Brick by brick, evidence by evidence, day by painful day. And when she walked away, she didn't look back. Because that's what you do with dead things. You bury them, and then you build something better on top. There's a strange kind of quiet that follows public ruin. Not the dramatic silence of judgment or shame that's noisy in its own way, filled with whispers and side glances and the tension of reputations bleeding out. No, what I'm talking about is the stillness that arrives after. The moment when people stop looking. When your story is no longer interesting enough to gossip about. When your fall from grace has finished echoing through the walls of community and all that's left is the hollow chamber it carved in your chest. That's where I've been living. Not in shame, not anymore, in understanding. Because shame implies surprise. It suggests you didn't know better. That maybe if you had just been wiser, stronger, more present, you might have chosen differently. But the truth is, I knew. I knew when I lied. When I drifted. When I convinced myself that Bianca's patience was permission. When I told myself that Cass was freedom instead of fantasy. When I excused every small theft from bank accounts, from trust, from time as a necessary evil for a happiness I thought I deserved. I knew, I just didn't care, until I did. Now, I wake early, not because I have somewhere to be, but because sleep is a currency I spent recklessly during the years I thought I was invincible, and it doesn't come cheap anymore. My apartment smells like black coffee and dust. I keep the blinds open most days, let the morning light cut through the slats and lay itself across the floor like something alive, something trying to remind me the world still spins even if I no longer matter much to it. There's dignity in repetition, in small, quiet rituals. I make my bed every morning, fold the sheets tightly hospital corners like my grandfather taught me. I boil water in a kettle instead of using the microwave. I read physical books again, not articles, or feeds things with spines and pages that require both hands and attention. It's not atonement. It's rebuilding, one brick at a time. I took a job a few months ago, not in consulting, not in finance, nothing anyone would attach my old name to. I work at a hardware store, 2 days on the floor, 3 in back office inventory. It's not glamorous, no suits, no clients, but the numbers make sense. They stay where I put them. The shelves don't lie, and the people, God help me, the people are kind in a way I haven't earned, but try to match. Sometimes on slow afternoons I find myself teaching a younger guy how to budget his paycheck. He asked once if I used to do accounting. I said yes, but that I had been out of the game for a while. He didn't press. Most people don't these days. I'm just Greg, the guy who always knows which aisle the galvanized screws are in, who never misses a stock rotation report, who makes coffee too strong and hums Sinatra when he thinks no one's listening. And that's okay, because the version of me who demanded attention, who thought admiration was the same as love. That man couldn't tell you the difference between intimacy and performance if it was tattooed on the back of his hand. He's gone. Sometimes I still catch glimpses of my past life. A familiar face at the gas station. A lawyer I used to play racquetball with at the old club. They see me and hesitate. Some nod. Some pretend not to. A few offer small talk, the weather, the economy, and awkward, "Have you been?" with eyes that won't hold mine. I don't blame them. To them, I'm a cautionary tale with legs. Proof that even men with charm and credit and ambition can end up standing in the checkout line with bags under their eyes and calloused hands from manual inventory. It used to sting, now it just lands, softly, like rain that soaks instead of stabs. Bianca, from what I hear, is thriving. Her consultancy has taken off. She's been featured in a local magazine, something about empowering women through financial independence. A friend of a friend sent me the article, half out of curiosity, half out of a desire to twist the knife. I read it 3 times. She looked strong in the photo, not just polished, rooted. The interview was gracious. No dirt, no revenge fantasy, just honesty, poise, focus. There was a quote at the end, something about how the life she lives now is one she once dreamed of but didn't think she deserved. That stopped me cold, because I used to think I was the one who deserved more, who was stifled, who was settling. But the truth was far simpler, far more damning. I wasn't settling. I was being held up by a woman too loyal to let me collapse under the weight of my own ego. And when she let go, I didn't fall. I sank. Amelia came to visit once. Just once. It was early spring. The trees hadn't bloomed yet, and everything was still bare brittle from the cold that wouldn't quite release its grip. She knocked on the door with a kind of hesitation that made me want to weep. She looked older than I remembered, not just in her face, but in her eyes, like life had pressed its fingers into her early smudged the corners. We sat at my tiny kitchen table and drank the tea I made too strong. She didn't smile much, but she didn't cry either. She told me she was proud of her mother, that she'd started investing, that she wanted to own property by the time she was 30, that she was seeing someone who respected her time. She didn't say it, but I heard the subtext. Not someone like you, Dad. And I nodded, because what else was there to do? When she stood to leave, she looked around the apartment once more. I waited for a judgment, a question, something. But all she said was, "You look tired." I told her I was working on that. She didn't hug me when she left, but she didn't slam the door either, and somehow that was mercy enough. It's funny the man I used to be would have called this rock bottom, would have pointed at the lack of luxury, the missing titles, the silence from old allies, and said, "This is failure." But now I see it for what it really is, a beginning, a painful, overdue, absolutely necessary beginning. I don't know what the future holds. I don't pretend to. I don't plot anymore. I don't manipulate. I don't chase. I wake, I work, I breathe. And some days that feels like enough. I still think about her sometimes. Not Cassandra. Not anymore. That fire died the moment it met real life. But Bianca, I think about the quiet strength she wielded. The way she held the line. The way she let me collapse without pushing. The way she trusted the truth to do its job, and it did. I think about what it means to lose with grace, because that's what she taught me. Not through sermons, but through silence, through action, through consequence. And if there's a lesson in all this, something real, something I'd tattoo on my heart if I could, it's this. You don't get to choose how people remember you. You only get to choose who you are while they're watching. And eventually, the mask slips. Eventually, the story catches up. Eventually, the person you've been pretending to be files for divorce hands you an envelope and walks out without flinching. And when that day comes, you'll either break into fragments you can't gather, or rebuild from the dust. I'm still rebuilding, still learning, still waking up in a quiet room and reminding myself that no one owes me forgiveness. That forgiveness isn't owed, it's earned. And sometimes it's not given at all. And even that has to be okay. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not pretending anymore.